I think I should begin by saying I was born and raised in Poughkeepsie, New York. If you're not familiar with it, I'm located about 2 hours outside of the ever-famous New York City. It's where most people like to say upstate New York begins. While a lot of townies argue that and suggest that we're not upstaters at all, if you look at a map of New York State, it's pretty apparent. You can't help but accept that we are the last stop on the Metro North. So, for anyone visiting the city, it's understandable why we're considered such a long shot away. It has all the fixings of a regular suburb. A beautiful, lush town with quaint communities and good schools, families anchored in their homes that they've owned for decades, and beautiful foliage in the fall that leaf peepers come in droves to see. And just a few miles outside of the town is the city of Poughkeepsie, which has a bit of a different reputation. If there's anything I'm familiar with, it's my hometown and specifically the local urban legends and stories that go with it. Ever since the cult following of the Poughkeepsie tapes, a horror movie which took some serious liberties with its inspiration, people have turned a creeped out eye towards the area. With the constant news of shootings, poverty, and one contemporary serial killer, it seems like Poughkeepsie started to get quite the rep for being a dying little city cast against the Hudson River. While we may not actually have a mask-wearing, walking-on-all-fours serial killer filming bad-quality VHS tapes all over town, we do have some interesting, sometimes morbid, and always fascinating stories flittering about. Not only Poughkeepsie either, but rather the entire area just a tiny bit north of Manhattan. Stories that provide a wealth of history, and the legends that pass from generation to generation. There are many tales, some famous and some not so much, that have surrounded us since we were little kids whispering tales on the playground. I'd like to introduce you to a few of them. Welcome to Hudson Valley Legends. To start us off today, I'd like to go with one of my local history favorites that not necessarily everyone is familiar with. It's the story of a man named Andrew Jackson Davis, who was born in 1826 and died in 1910. He sounds just as normal and bland as anyone born in the 1820s would have been with a name like that, right? Well, he went by another more popular name, and that was the Poughkeepsie Seer. Davis was born in Blooming Grove, New York, a little area 30 miles outside of Poughkeepsie. He grew up poor under the roof of an alcoholic father and a deeply religious mother who claimed to have the power of spiritual vision. They moved from town to town across New York State as his father searched for work, so Davis received very little formal education in his upbringing. It's stated that he may have only completed basic childhood education at most. However, by the time he was 15, it was said that he began to hear voices and had senses of clairvoyance himself. Unlike his mother's sense of spiritual vision, his was deep-rooted in things much larger than just the Word of God. He was hearing things from beyond realms familiar to him, words of enlightenment and moral code that stretched beyond his Shaker upbringing. For those of you who don't know, Shaker is the term they used in place of shaking Quaker. That is, Quakers who would literally vibrate with ecstatic joy when in praise of God. They were like Quaker 2.0. At this time, he was living in Poughkeepsie and failing miserably at his day job as a shoemaker, which makes sense to me. I suppose if the universe is giving you access to spiritual powers beyond normal human recognition, it might be hard to think about working on men's boots all day long. These spiritual visions grew deeper and took over Davis's life as the years went on. He said he was able to access planes of consciousness no others could see. He began to prescribe homeopathic cures for strange diseases that nobody could cure, and according to the legend, these healing medicines he created were actually working. He could go into specific detail regarding what happens to our souls when we die, all while in a catatonic state he learned from practicing mesmerism. He started to gain quite the following, too. People came and filled lecture halls to see him forecast and predict. Whether they came to see him more as a sideshow than as an actual psychic is up for debate, but I can tell you it's rumored Abraham Lincoln sought him out for advice, and Edgar Allan Poe attended one of his lectures on mesmerism. Poe, inspired by the event he witnessed, eventually went on to write the short story, The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar, a story about a mesmerist who puts a man into a trance just before death. Very cool, meta sort of story if you're a fan of Poe. For For someone with only a few months of formal education, he would go on to write 30 books and become exceptionally well-versed in medicine, psychiatry, and philosophy. He spoke of evolution within humans, plants, and animals in 1850, almost a decade before Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species. As his reputation and then wild notions spread across the country, he created a name for himself, that is, the Poughkeepsie Seer. Davis went on in his life following his spiritual muse after his popularity peaked and narrowed. He lectured, wrote books, and prescribed herbal remedies for patients up until his death in 1910. He is considered a pioneer in the realm of Western culture metaphysics. It's also worth noting that his radical ideologies of equality of the sexes, divorce, and spiritual domain were something that would not reoccur for quite some time, way into the future. I find it fascinating that he's just not well known these days. You would think that someone of this magnitude, a touring seer who had followers and viewers filling his lecture halls, would be a little more visual in our local history. I think it might have to do with the fact that his books mostly go unread now for, the right reasons. Critics of him tell that his medical writings were actually nothing but nonsense and useless jargon. Evidently, they hold no relevance in modern-day science, and maybe that's why Andrew Jackson Davis has fallen victim to becoming a ghost of the century. If you're interested in reading some more about the Poughkeepsie Seer and getting a deeper understanding of his history and influence, I definitely suggest this amazing book by Mitch Horowitz. It's called Occult America: The Secret History of How Mysticism Shaped Our Nation. Seriously, if you're into occult readings at all, this is a must-have for your collection. Also, look into andrewjacksondavis.com and check out all the detailed articles and sources they have. It's a great contribution to saving the memory of a once famous man in Poughkeepsie's history books. I leave you with a quote by the Poughkeepsie Seer himself, one that makes me smile in knowing that Davis covered his ground in his visions, a sort of warning, if you will, about what could be expected of him. Quote, "I do not promise to believe tomorrow exactly what I believe today, and I do not believe today exactly what I believed yesterday. I expect to make, as I have made, some honest progress within every succeeding 24 hours. Beyond the Valley, 1885. It's not necessarily educational, but just reminds me of what happens when you visit a tarot reader or a psychic today. They give you that little warning that they might be off the mark, like even though they're speaking to some veiled spirits beyond our human plane, it might be a little fuzzy and they might have tuned into the wrong channel. I'm not hating on it or anything. I just thought it was clever that he gave himself a disclaimer." Although Andrew Jackson Davis is a lost legend and not one to come up in conversation too often now, next episode I'll be talking about something a bit more contemporary, something that still resonates throughout the area today, a person so shocking that the Hudson Valley will forever know his name and the horrors that occurred in his house, a house just a few miles down the road from me, next time on Hudson Valley Legends. Thank you for listening to Hudson Valley Legends. Narration was by me, Tony Odell. Music is Credits by Dust Motes. Produced by Michael McDermott for the Live From Somewhere podcast channel. Visit us at www.lfspod.com. If you have any questions, comments, or want to make a suggestion for an upcoming topic, please be sure to send an email to hvlegends@gmail.com.